They say the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. Beckett Hale, the ruthless CEO of Hale Enterprises, thought he had won. He got the divorce, he kept his fortune, and he kept his power. He thought his ex-wife, Kennedy, was just a quiet, fading shadow who couldn't survive without him. He was wrong. 5 years of marriage, and he never really looked at her. But 3 months after she left, he saw her across a crowded room. She was looking at another man, a man with none of Beckett's money, but all of his attention. And then she smiled. It wasn't the polite smile she gave the press. It was a smile Beckett had never seen. And in that split second, the man who owned everything realized. He had lost the only thing that mattered. This is the story of a heart breaking after it stopped beating. The silence in the conference room was expensive. It smelled of mahogany polish, aged leather, and the distinct, ozone-like crispness of air conditioning that cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Beckett Hale checked his watch. A Patek Philippe. It was 2:14 p.m. He had a board meeting at 3:00 p.m. This needed to be done. Across the sprawling glass table sat Kennedy Frost, formerly Kennedy Hale. She looked smaller than he remembered, though he saw her every morning across the breakfast island. Today, she wore a simple beige trench coat, buttoned to the throat, her hands folded in her lap. She looked like a grayscale sketch in a Technicolor world. "The terms are standard, Beckett," Tate Langston said, sliding the heavy document across the glass. Tate was Beckett's oldest friend and brutally efficient corporate counsel. "She isn't contesting the prenup. She isn't asking for the penthouse. She isn't even asking for spousal support beyond the initial severance." Beckett frowned, his sharp, angular face tightening. He looked at Kennedy. "You're declining the alimony. That's foolish, Kennedy. You haven't worked in 5 years. You have no assets." Kennedy didn't look up at his face. She looked at his tie, a crimson silk knot. "I have my degree, Beckett. I have my hands. I don't want the money." "It's not about want," Beckett said, his voice dropping to that low, commanding baritone that usually made competitors stutter. "It's about survival. You're used to a certain lifestyle. Don't be a martyr. Take the check." Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were hazel, flecked with green, but today they looked flat, dull. "I don't want to be paid to leave you, Beckett. I just want to leave." The words were spoken softly, without venom, which made them sting more. Beckett felt a flicker of irritation. Even in this, she was defying him. He was the provider. He was the one who fixed things with checks and influence. By refusing the money, she was denying him the last act of control. "Fine," Beckett snapped, uncapping his fountain pen. "If you want to play the starving artist, that's your choice. But don't come back to me when the rent is due and the world realizes you're just—" He trailed off. Just what? Just the quiet ornament he'd kept on a shelf? "Just Kennedy," she finished for him. She picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. There were no tears. For 5 years, Beckett had expected hysteria. He had expected her to scream about his late nights, his business trips with Sierra Locke, his missed anniversaries. But she had never screamed. She had just gone quiet. And now, that silence was permanent. Scritch, scratch. Kennedy Frost. She stood up, leaving the pen on the document. She didn't look back at the view of the city, a view he owned. She picked up her bag. "Goodbye, Beckett," she said. "Kennedy," he called out, an instinct he couldn't name rising in his chest. She paused at the frosted glass door. "You're making a mistake," he said, smoothing his suit jacket. "It's cold out there." "I know," she said, and for the first time in months, her voice sounded clear. But at least it's real. The door clicked shut. Beckett stared at the door for a long 10 seconds. Then he exhaled, a harsh rush of air. "It's done," Tate said, organizing the papers. "Clean break. You're a free man, Beck." "Yeah," Beckett muttered, standing up and buttoning his jacket. He walked to the window, looking down at the ants scurrying on the pavement 40 stories below. He tried to feel the relief he had promised himself. No more guilt trips. No more silent judgments when he came home at midnight. "I won," Beckett whispered to the glass. But as he watched the grey city below, he couldn't shake the feeling that the room had suddenly become much, much larger, and he was very small inside it. 3 months later, success tasted like scotch, aged 18 years, poured into a crystal tumbler. Beckett sat in his study, the city lights of New York spread out before him like a digital nervous system. Hale Enterprises had just acquired a massive logistics firm in the Pacific Northwest. It was the deal of the decade. His phone was buzzing incessantly with congratulations. "You look like a man who conquered the world," a voice purred from the doorway. Sierra Locke walked in. She was everything Kennedy was not. Sharp, ambitious, loud in her beauty. She wore a dress that cost more than a car, and she wielded her sexuality like a corporate asset. Sierra was his VP of operations, and for the last 2 years of his marriage, she had been his primary confidant. "It's a good night, Sierra," Beckett said, swirling his drink. She walked over, taking the glass from his hand and taking a sip, leaving a lipstick stain on the rim. "We should celebrate. The team is going to Per Se, or we could stay here." She ran a manicured nail down the lapel of his shirt. This was the natural progression. Everyone assumed that once Kennedy was out of the picture, Sierra would ascend to the throne. It made sense. They were both sharks. They understood the blood in the water. "Not tonight," Beckett said, surprising himself. He gently removed her hand. "I have to review the merger contracts for the Tokyo branch." Sierra's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic crack in her composure. "Beckett, it's been 3 months. The ink is dry. You're barely sleeping. You're working harder now than when you were avoiding going home to her." "I'm working because I enjoy it," Beckett lied. "You're working because you're looking for ghosts," Sierra said sharply. "She's gone, Beck. She's living in some studio apartment in Brooklyn, probably painting fruit bowls. You're the king of New York. Act like it." She placed the glass down with a heavy thud and turned on her heel. "I'll see you at the office at 6 a.m. Don't be late." When she left, the silence rushed back in. It was deafening. Beckett groaned and rubbed his temples. He walked out of the study and into the hallway. The penthouse was 6,000 square feet of modern minimalism. White marble, black steel, glass. He found himself walking toward the guest wing. There was a room at the end of the hall, the one room that had faced the north light. Kennedy's studio, though he had rarely called it that. He usually called it the mess. He pushed the door open. The cleaners had stripped it. The easel was gone. The smell of turpentine and lavender was gone, replaced by the sterile scent of lemon polish. He walked to the corner where she used to sit on the floor, cross-legged, staring at canvases for hours. He used to hate it. "Why don't you do something productive?" he would think. "Why don't you host dinners like the other wives?" His foot nudged something near the baseboard. He crouched down. Wedged between the floor and the heavy molding was a small charcoal sketch. It must have fallen and been missed by the maids. Beckett picked it up. It was on cheap paper, crinkled at the edges. It was a sketch of him. But it wasn't the Beckett he saw in the mirror. The COO with the hard jaw and the dead eyes. This Beckett was asleep. His guard was down. His hair was messy. and there was a softness to his mouth that he hadn't seen in years. At the bottom, in her tiny, precise handwriting, it was dated 5 years ago, the morning after the wedding. Beckett stared at the drawing. He remembered that morning. They had been in Italy. He hadn't checked his email for 3 whole days. He had been happy. He realized then that Kennedy hadn't just painted fruit bowls. She had been painting him. She had been trying to capture the man she loved, even as that man slowly turned into stone. He crumpled the paper in his fist, then stopped. He smoothed it out, his fingers trembling slightly. He folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket, right over his heart. He told himself it was just a curiosity, a souvenir. But as he stood in the empty white room, he felt a phantom ache in his chest, a hunger that the acquisition of a logistics firm couldn't feed. The Winter Solstice Gala was the event of the season. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a convergence of old money, new tech billionaires, and the cultural elite. Beckett hated these events, but they were necessary. It was where alliances were forged. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like armor. Sierra was on his arm, dazzling in emerald green, working the room with the efficiency of a politician. "The senator is looking at you," Sierra whispered, leaning in. "Go shake his hand. We need the zoning permits for the Hudson Yards project." "I see him," Beckett murmured, scanning the crowd. He wasn't looking for the senator. He didn't know who he was looking for, but his eyes were restless. They moved through the temple of Denda, the sandstone glowing under the amber uplighting. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter rippled, polite, guarded laughter. "And here we have the emerging artists showcase," a voice announced over the microphone. "Please welcome the curator for tonight's charity auction." Beckett turned toward the stage, half listening, and then the air left his lungs. She was standing near a sculpture of a winged victory. Kennedy. But it wasn't the Kennedy of the last 5 years. The beige trench coat was gone. The grey cardigans were gone. She was wearing red. A deep oxblood velvet dress that clung to her frame, off the shoulder, exposing the elegant line of her neck. Her hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun to hide away, was loose, cascading in dark waves over her shoulders. She wore gold drop earrings that caught the light. She looked alive, vibrant, dangerous. "Is that—" Sierra stopped mid-sentence, her grip on Beckett's arm tightening. "What is she doing here?" "I don't know," Beckett whispered. He couldn't look away. He felt a magnetic pull, a physical need to walk over to her and claim her, to say, "You're mine. You don't wear red. You hate attention." But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at a man standing next to her. He wasn't in a tuxedo. He wore a dark charcoal suit, no tie, the top button open. He had messy, sun-bleached hair and a beard that was neatly trimmed but rugged. He looked out of place among the hedge fund managers. He looked like he smelled of wood smoke and rain. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne. He leaned down and whispered something in Kennedy's ear. Beckett watched, frozen. He expected Kennedy to shy away. She hated whispers. She hated public displays of intimacy. She always flinched when people got too close. But she didn't flinch. She threw her head back, and she smiled. It wasn't the polite, tight-lipped smile she gave the board members' wives. It wasn't the sad, apologetic smile she used to give Beckett when he came home late. This smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. It showed her teeth. It was radiant, unfiltered, and utterly devastating. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It transformed her face from beautiful to breathtaking. Beckett felt a physical blow to his solar plexus. The room spun. "I have never seen that," he thought. In 5 years of marriage, in Paris, in Rome, in the penthouse. I never made her look like that. The man, who the hell was he, laughed with her, a warm, booming sound. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek. Kennedy leaned into his touch. She rested her hand on his chest, right over his heart, looking up at him with a gaze so full of adoration it burned Beckett to witness it. "Who is that?" Beckett demanded, his voice ragged. Sierra scoffed. "That? That's Travis Rhodes. He's a nobody, a landscape architect. He does community gardens in the Bronx. He makes dirt for a living, Beckett. Ignore them." Beckett couldn't ignore them. He was transfixed. He watched as Travis said something else, and Kennedy laughed again, covering her mouth playfully, her eyes dancing. For the first time in his life, Beckett Hale, the man who owned half the city, felt like a pauper. He was watching a woman he had discarded as boring shine like a diamond for a man who played in the dirt. A dark, twisting knot of jealousy, hot and irrational, coiled in his gut. "He's touching her," Beckett growled, stepping forward. Sierra grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. "Don't you dare. You are Beckett Hale. You do not make scenes over ex-wives." "She's Mrs. Hale," he muttered, the divorce papers suddenly feeling like a hallucination. "She's Ms. Frost," Sierra corrected coldly. "And she looks happy, Beckett. Happier than she ever looked with you." The truth was a knife, and Sierra twisted it. Beckett stood rooted to the spot, the champagne in his hand warm and flat. He watched Kennedy smile at Travis Rhodes again, a smile that promised secrets, warmth, and a future. "That smile belongs to me," his ego screamed. "You never earned it," his conscience whispered. He turned away, unable to watch, but the image was branded onto his retinas. The woman in red, the man with the gentle hands, and the smile that proved Beckett Hale had lost the game before he even knew he was playing. The hangover from the gala wasn't physical. It was existential. Beckett sat in his office the next morning, the view of the Hudson River obscured by a thick, suffocating fog. On his desk lay a dossier. It was thin, uncomfortably thin, for a man Beckett wanted to destroy. "Travis Rhodes," Peyton Knight said, standing on the other side of the desk. Peyton was Beckett's head of security, a woman who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle. "He's clean, Beckett." "Disappointingly so." Beckett flipped the folder open. "Everyone has dirt, Peyton. You just haven't dug deep enough." "He's not a corporate player," Peyton explained, her voice bored. "He's a landscape architect, graduated from Cornell, top of his class. He worked for a high-end firm for 2 years, quit, and started a non-profit called Urban Roots. He rehabilitates abandoned lots in the Bronx and turns them into community gardens. He lives in a renovated loft above a bakery in Astoria. No debts, no criminal record. He volunteers at a dog shelter on Sundays." Beckett stared at the photo of Travis attached to the file. It was a candid shot, probably taken from social media. Travis was laughing, his hands covered in soil, holding up a giant, misshapen tomato. He looked ridiculous. He looked free. "He makes no money," Beckett sneered, tossing the file down. "How is he funding Kennedy's lifestyle? The studio, the materials?" "Kennedy is funding herself," Peyton corrected quietly. "She sold 3 paintings last month to a gallery in Soho. And Travis isn't poor, Beckett. His family is Rhodes Timber. Old money. Pacific Northwest money. He just doesn't use it. He walked away from his inheritance to plant carrots." Beckett felt a cold spike of irritation. A rich boy playing peasant. It was worse than him being actually poor. It meant he had choices, and he chose to be everything Beckett wasn't. "I want to see it," Beckett said, standing up. "See what?" "The garden, where she spends her time." An hour later, Beckett's black Maybach was rolling slowly through a neighborhood in the Bronx that had seen better days, though signs of gentrification were creeping in like ivy. The car stopped in front of a chain-link fence woven with morning glories. Beckett stepped out. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and Italian leather shoes that cost more than the rent of the buildings surrounding him. The air here smelled different: damp earth, crushed basil, and exhaust. He pushed the gate open. It was an oasis. Rows of raised beds overflowed with winter kale and root vegetables. There was a greenhouse made of reclaimed windows, glowing in the afternoon sun. And in the center, under a massive oak tree that had miraculously survived the city's sprawl, was a wooden table. Kennedy was there. She was wearing oversized overalls covered in paint and dirt, her hair in a messy knot. She was sanding down a wooden planter. Travis was next to her, holding a mug of something steaming. He wasn't touching her, but the intimacy was palpable in the space between them. He was watching her work with a quiet, steady appreciation that Beckett had never possessed. Beckett walked toward them, his shoes crunching on the gravel path. Kennedy looked up. The smile she had been wearing vanished instantly, replaced by a guarded mask. It was like watching a flower close up before a storm. "Beckett," she said, putting down the sandpaper. "What are you doing here?" Travis turned. He didn't look intimidated. He looked at Beckett with a calm, assessing gaze, sipping his coffee. "I was in the neighborhood," Beckett lied smoothly, stopping at the edge of the work area. "Checking on some potential real estate developments." "There's nothing for you to buy here," Travis said. His voice was deep, gravelly. "This land is in a trust." "Everything is for sale, Mr. Rhodes," Beckett said, locking eyes with him. "It just depends on the currency." Kennedy stepped between them, wiping her hands on a rag. "Beckett, leave. Please. You don't belong here." "I came to see how you were managing," Beckett said, his eyes drifting back to her. "You refused the alimony. I was concerned you might be struggling." He looked meaningfully at the dirt on her overalls, implying that this manual labor, this grit, was a sign of failure. Kennedy laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "Struggling? Beckett, look around. I'm building things. With my hands. Do you know how long it's been since I felt useful? In your penthouse, I was just a ghost haunting the hallways. Here, I'm real." "You're sanding wood in the Bronx, Kennedy," Beckett said, his voice dropping. "You were the wife of a CEO. You hosted galas. You had status." "I had your status," she corrected. "I was an accessory, like your watch, like your car. And when I stopped working perfectly, you just stopped looking at me." "I was building an empire for us," Beckett snapped, his composure cracking. "I worked 18-hour days to give you that life." "I never asked for the empire, Beckett," she shouted back, stepping closer. "I asked for a husband. I asked for you. Do you know I waited up for you on our 5th anniversary until 3 a.m.? You didn't even call. You were in Tokyo with Sierra." Beckett stiffened. "That was business. It's always business," Travis interjected softly. He set his mug down and walked over to stand beside Kennedy. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a shield. "Mr. Hale, I think you should go. You're upsetting her." "Stay out of this, Gardner," Beckett spat. "She's not yours anymore," Travis said, his voice hardening. "You signed the papers. You let her go. You don't get to come here and critique how she rebuilds the life you broke." Beckett looked at Travis, then at Kennedy. He saw the way she leaned slightly toward Travis, seeking his warmth. He saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of him, but fear of the old life dragging her back. He realized with a sickening jolt that he was the villain in this scene. "Fine," Beckett said, adjusting his cuffs. "If this is the life you want, Kennedy, playing house in the dirt, enjoy it." He turned and walked away. He didn't look back, but as he got into the Maybach, his hands were shaking. He told himself it was rage, but deep down, he knew it was the terrifying realization that the dirt Kennedy was living in had more life in it than his entire glass tower. The weeks following the encounter at the garden were a blur of aggression for Hale Enterprises. Beckett was ruthless. He acquired 3 competitors, fired 2 executives, and worked himself into a state of exhaustion that no amount of caffeine could fix. He was trying to drown the memory of Kennedy's voice. "I asked for you." One rainy Tuesday evening, Tate Langston walked into Beckett's office. Tate looked weary. He closed the door and locked it, a gesture that made Beckett look up from his screens. "We have a problem," Tate said, sitting down without being asked. "The merger?" "No, personal." Tate pulled a bottle of whiskey from his briefcase and 2 glasses. He poured them both a generous shot. "I found something, Beck. In the archives. I was cleaning out the digital records for the divorce finalization, archiving the communication logs. And I found a folder of emails from 3 years ago." Tate slid a tablet across the desk. Beckett frowned. 3 years ago. That was the year Kennedy had the miscarriage. He remembered it as a dark time. He had been in London for the IPO launch. He remembered coming home a week later, and she was just empty. She had told him she lost the baby, and he had said, "We can try again," and then went back to work. He looked at the tablet. It was a log of intercepted emails, sent from Kennedy's account to Beckett's private server. Subject: "Please come home." Subject: "Something is wrong." Subject: "I'm at the hospital. I'm scared." Subject: "I lost him. Where are you?" There were dozens of them, desperate, pleading cries for help. "I never saw these," Beckett whispered, scrolling through them. His heart hammered against his ribs. I thought she didn't call. I thought she handled it alone because she wanted to." "You didn't see them because they were filtered," Tate said grimly. "Marked as spam. Deleted from the server before they hit your inbox." Beckett looked up, his eyes wide. "Who manages my server, Tate?" Tate didn't answer. He didn't have to. The door opened, and Sierra walked in, holding a stack of files. "Beckett, we need to sign off on the—" "Why is the door locked?" Beckett stood up slowly. The tablet was trembling in his hand. "Sierra," he said, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. 3 years ago, the London IPO. Sierra blinked, sensing the shift in the room immediately. She looked at Tate, then at the tablet. Her expression didn't change, she was too good for that, but her posture stiffened. "What about it?" she asked coolly. "Did you block her emails?" Beckett asked. He walked around the desk, moving toward her like a predator. "When she was losing our child. Did you block her?" Sierra held her ground. "I managed your communications, Beckett. You were under immense pressure. The IPO was fragile. You gave me standing orders. No distractions. Only emergencies." "My wife losing a child is not a distraction," Beckett roared. The sound echoed off the glass walls, primal and terrifying. "She was always needy, Beckett," Sierra shouted back, her mask finally slipping, revealing the ugly jealousy underneath. "She was always dragging you down with her emotions and her fragility. You were on the brink of becoming a billionaire. I protected you. I did what needed to be done to keep you focused." "You let her go through that alone," Beckett said, his voice breaking. "She thought I ignored her. For 3 years. She thought I knew and didn't care. And you're better off, Sierra insisted. Look at you now. You're on top of the world. She would have made you mediocre. I made you a king. You made me a monster, Beckett whispered. He looked at Sierra, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had almost started a relationship with. He saw her now for what she was, a mirror reflecting his own worst ambition. Get out, Beckett said. Beckett, be reasonable. Get out, he screamed, throwing the crystal glass against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 diamonds. You're fired, Sierra. If I see you in this building in 10 minutes, I'll have security throw you out. And if you ever come near me or Kennedy again, I will bury you in so many lawsuits you won't be able to breathe. Sierra stared at him, her face pale. She looked at Tate, who looked away. She turned and fled. Beckett sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. The silence of the office was no longer expensive. It was a tomb. He read the emails again. I'm scared, Beck. Please just hold my hand. He wept. For the first time in 20 years, the CEO of Hale Enterprises wept. Knowing the truth was one thing. Fixing it was another. Beckett spent the next week in a haze of regret. He realized that the indifference he thought Kennedy had felt wasn't indifference at all. It was armor. She had built a wall to survive his perceived cruelty. He needed to tell her. He needed her to know that he hadn't ignored her on purpose. It wouldn't fix the marriage, that was dead, but it might fix the history. But before he could reach out, the world intervened. A storm hit New York, a massive nor'easter that flooded subways and tore down power lines. Beckett was at home, watching the rain lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows when his phone rang. It was Tate. Turn on the news, Beck, Tate said. Channel 4. Beckett grabbed the remote. The screen showed a reporter standing in torrential rain, wind whipping her hair. Behind her was chaos. A massive construction crane from a neighboring site had collapsed. Tragedy in the Bronx tonight as high winds toppled a crane onto the Urban Roots Community Center and Garden, the reporter shouted over the wind. Emergency crews are on the scene digging through the rubble. We have reports that 2 people were inside the greenhouse, securing the structure when it came down. Beckett's blood froze. The greenhouse. He didn't think. He didn't call his driver. He grabbed his keys, ran to the elevator, and sprinted to his garage. He took the Aston Martin and drove like a madman into the storm. The drive was a nightmare of hydroplaning tires and blurred lights. When he reached the site, it was a disaster zone. Blue and red lights flashed against the wet pavement. Firefighters were shouting. The beautiful wooden greenhouse he had seen just days ago was a splintered wreck of glass and timber, crushed under the steel arm of a fallen crane. Beckett abandoned his car in the middle of the street and ran toward the police line. "Let me through!" he shouted at an officer. "Sir, stay back. It's unstable." "My wife is in there," Beckett yelled, the title slipping out instinctively. "Kennedy!" He saw a figure sitting on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket. It was Travis. Travis was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his face grey with dust and rain. He was staring at the rubble with hollow eyes. Beckett ran to him. "Where is she? Travis, where is she?" Travis looked up slowly. His eyes were haunted. "She went back in," he rasped. "The dog. The stray she feeds. She went back in to get him right before the beam snapped." "Is she—" Beckett couldn't finish the sentence. "They're digging!" Travis choked out. "Beckett, she's under the timber!" Beckett looked at the pile of debris. Rain was pouring down, turning the dust to mud. Without a word, Beckett Hale, a man whose hands were insured for millions, ducked under the police tape. "Hey!" a firefighter shouted. Beckett ignored him. He scrambled up the wet mound of wood and glass. He started clawing at the beams. "Kennedy! Kennedy, can you hear me?" "Beckett, stop!" Travis was behind him now, staggering up the pile. "You can't lift that! Help me!" Beckett screamed, grabbing a heavy wooden beam that was part of the roof structure. "She's right here. I can see the red fabric. She's wearing the red scarf." Travis grabbed the other end. The two men, the CEO and the gardener, the past and the future, heaved against the weight of the wreckage. They strained, slipping in the mud, their hands tearing on the rough wood. "1, 2, 3, Beckett grunted. They shifted the beam just enough. Below them, in a small pocket of space, created by a sturdy workbench, Kennedy was curled up, clutching a shivering terrier. She was covered in dust, her eyes closed. "Kennedy!" Beckett dropped into the hole, disregarding the jagged glass slicing his trousers. He checked her pulse. It was there. Faint, but there. She opened her eyes slowly. They focused on Beckett's face, which was wet with rain and tears. "Beck," she whispered, confused. "Am I dreaming?" "No, I'm here," Beckett sobbed, pulling her into his arms. "I'm here. I've got you." The firefighters were there a second later, pulling them out. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, she reached out. Not for Beckett, but for Travis. Travis took her hand, pressing it to his lips, weeping with relief. Beckett stood back, drenched, bleeding, and alone in the rain. He watched them. He saw the look in Kennedy's eyes as she looked at Travis. It was safety. It was home. And in that moment, amidst the wreckage of the storm, Beckett Hale finally understood the true cost of his ambition. He had saved her life tonight, perhaps, but he had lost her soul a long, long time ago. Kennedy survived, but the cost was etched into the pale lines of her face. She had a compound fracture in her left arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that left the world spinning for days. 2 weeks after the accident, the private room at Lenox Hill Hospital was a botanical garden of guilt. Every surface, the windowsill, the rolling tray, the top of the wardrobe, was covered in flowers. Massive, architectural arrangements of Casablanca lilies, white roses, and rare orchids towered over the medical equipment. They were beautiful, oppressive, and unmistakably from Beckett. They smelled of money and apology. On the bedside table, however, sat the only living thing that seemed to belong there. A small, hardy succulent planted in a chipped ceramic mug that read, "World's Okayest Gardener." That was from Travis. Kennedy lay still, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of afternoon light. She felt fragile, like a vase that had been glued back together but couldn't hold water. The memory of the collapse, the screaming metal, the weight of the timber, the darkness, still woke her up at night, gasping for air. And then, the memory of the voice in the dark. "I've got you." The door clicked open. The air in the room shifted, growing heavier. Beckett walked in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the storm. The invincible armor of the CEO was gone. He wasn't wearing a tie. His Italian dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up haphazardly, revealing a bruise on his forearm, a souvenir from the rubble. His face was drawn, stubble shading his jaw. He looked older, human. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the plastic rail as if it were the helm of a sinking ship. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough, lacking its usual polished cadence. Kennedy turned her head slowly on the pillow. "Beckett." "The doctors say the surgery on your arm went well," he said, reciting the medical facts as if they were stock prices, something he could understand, something he could control. "You'll need physical therapy for 6 months, but full mobility should return." "I know," Kennedy said softly. "Travis told me." At the mention of Travis's name, Beckett flinched slightly. but he nodded. He's in the waiting room. I asked him for 5 minutes. He didn't want to give them to me. I don't blame him. You pulled me out, Kennedy said, searching his face. Travis told me what you did. You climbed the pile. You lifted the beam. Travis did the heavy lifting, Beckett said quickly, looking down at his hands. I was just there, yelling, panicking. You were there, she repeated. Why? Beckett looked up, and his eyes were raw. Because I couldn't be anywhere else. Because the thought of you under that wood, it terrified me more than losing the company, more than anything. He pulled the visitor's chair closer, the metal legs scraping against the linoleum. He didn't sit. He stood beside her, awkwardly, holding a thick manila envelope. I need to tell you something, Kennedy. Something that doesn't change anything. We're still over, I know that. But it changes the history. It changes the silence. He took a breath that shuddered in his chest. Tate found the archives, the server logs from 3 years ago. Kennedy's brow furrowed. What logs? The emails, Beckett whispered. From the week of the IPO, the week we lost the baby. Kennedy turned her face away, staring at the wall. The pain of that week was a scar she didn't touch. Beckett, please, I don't want to talk about that. You were busy. I handled it. It's done. No, Beckett said, his voice fierce with urgency. You didn't handle it because I was busy. You handled it because Sierra blocked your messages. Kennedy froze. The silence in the room stretched, tight as a piano wire. She slowly turned back to look at him. What? She marked them as spam, Beckett confessed, the words tasting like bile. Every plea, every update. I'm scared. It hurts. Please come home. I never saw them, Kennedy. I sat in that hotel room in London, staring at my phone, wondering why you weren't calling. I thought you were relieved. I thought you didn't want me there. You didn't know. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling. I swear on my life, Beckett said, tears finally spilling over his lashes. I would have burned Hale Enterprises to the ground to hold your hand that night. I didn't know. Kennedy closed her eyes, hot tears leaking out. For 3 years, she had carried the belief that her husband had ignored her miscarriage to ring a bell at the stock exchange. It had been the cornerstone of her resentment, the proof of his coldness. It doesn't fix it, Beckett said, wiping his face roughly. I built the wall that Sierra stood behind. I created a world where she thought keeping me from my dying child was efficiency. That's on me. I'm the monster who hired the gatekeeper. But I needed you to know. I didn't abandon you. Not in my heart. Kennedy reached out her good hand. Beckett hesitated, then took it. His grip was shaking. I believe you, she whispered. It hurts. God, it hurts to know we missed each other by a click of a button. But I believe you. They sat in that shared grief for a long moment, mourning the ghost of the child they never met, and the marriage that died in the silence. Beckett gently released her hand and picked up the envelope. I can't give you back those years, Kennedy, and I can't be the man you need now. Travis, he's the one who bought you the succulent. I bought you a funeral parlor of lilies. That says everything, doesn't it? He placed the envelope on the tray table. What is this? The deed, Beckett said. To the penthouse? Kennedy asked, confused. To the land, Beckett corrected. The community garden. The warehouse. The lot next door. Kennedy tried to sit up, wincing. The owner. Mr. Henderson said he was selling. He said the liability was too high after the crane collapse. He was going to sell to a luxury developer, Beckett said. I outbid them. I bought the entire city block this morning. Kennedy's face drained of color. You bought it? To do what? Turn it into condos. Beckett, that garden is everything to Travis, to the community. I bought it to put it in a trust, Beckett said softly. The Frost Roads Trust. It's irrevocable. It belongs to you and Travis. Nobody can ever take it from you again. Not a developer, not the city, and certainly not me. The zoning is locked for agricultural and community use for the next 99 years. Kennedy stared at the envelope. Her hand hovered over it. You gave away millions of dollars for a garden? You hate dirt, Beckett. I do, he admitted with a weak smile. But I saw you smile there, at the gala, and again in the dirt. I realized, I can't be the reason you smile, Kennedy. I don't know how to be that man. I'm too sharp, too cold. But I can be the guy who buys the land, so you have a place to do it. He stepped back toward the door, creating distance. Travis is a good man. He looks at you like you're the son. Don't let him go. Beckett! Kennedy called out. He stopped, his hand on the handle. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For the truth, and for the ground beneath my feet. Beckett nodded, looking at her one last time, memorizing the way the light hit her face, the way she looked, finally, at peace. Goodbye, Kennedy. 6 months later. The penthouse was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the past 5 years. It was the clean, echoing silence of departure. Beckett Hale stood in the center of the living room. The white marble floors were bare. The abstract sculptures were cratered. The view of Manhattan, once his kingdom, now just looked like a postcard he was forgetting to mail. Beckett had done the unthinkable. He had sold the company. It was the shock of the century on Wall Street. The shark of Fifth Avenue had stepped down as CEO. He retained a majority share, enough to keep the dividends flowing, but he had handed the reins over to a board of directors. He had fired Tate Langston, amicably but firmly, needing a clean break from the machinery that had enabled his worst impulses. He spent his days differently now. He had started a venture capital fund, Horizon, focused purely on sustainable urban development and green tech. He invested in people, not just profits. He wore jeans on Tuesdays. He started seeing a therapist named Dr. Aris, who forced him to talk about his father, his fear of failure, and the silence he used as a weapon. He hadn't seen Kennedy since the hospital. He kept his distance, respecting the boundaries he had violated for so long. He followed the news of the garden from afar, the new greenhouse, the youth programs, the harvest festivals. He read the articles, but he never visited. He was packing a box of books in his study. Marcus Aurelius, sun-bleached poetry anthologies, when the doorbell rang. He frowned. The doorman hadn't buzzed. He walked to the heavy oak door and pulled it open. Travis Rhodes stood in the hallway. The gardener looked uncomfortable in the sleek, sterile corridor. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into clean, dark denim, and his boots, though polished, still bore the scuffs of work. He held a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper under his arm. "Rhodes," Beckett said, surprise registering in his voice. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Is everything okay? Is there an issue with the trust? I told the lawyers to handle the property taxes in perpetuity." "The trust is fine," Travis said, his voice deep and steady. "Actually, better than fine. We're expanding. We're adding a bee sanctuary next month." "Good," Beckett said, nodding. "That's good. Bees are important." "I'm not here for business," Travis said. He shifted his weight, looking Beckett in the eye. There was no animosity in his gaze, only a strange, rugged kind of pity mixed with respect. "Kennedy wanted you to have this. We're getting married next spring, in the garden, under the new oak pergola." Beckett felt a sharp pang in his chest. It wasn't the searing agony of jealousy he had felt at the gala. It was a duller ache, like an old brake that throbs when it rains. It was the finality of it. "Congratulations," Beckett said, and he meant it. "I assume I'm not invited." "Probably best you aren't," Travis admitted, with a wry, honest smile. "It's going to be a lot of dirt, dogs, and cheap wine. Not your scene." "No," Beckett agreed softly. "I suppose not." "But she wanted you to have this," Travis said, extending the package. "She's been working on it for months. She said she couldn't move forward until she sent it to you." Beckett took the package. It was light. Tell her I hope she smiles every day, the way she did that night at the Met." Travis nodded. He turned to leave, then paused. "She is happy, Beckett. Really happy. You did a good thing with the land. You're not the villain in her story anymore. You're just a chapter. A necessary one." "A chapter," Beckett repeated, tasting the word. "I can live with that." Travis stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing the past away. Beckett walked back into the study. He sat on the floor, surrounded by the cardboard boxes of his dismantled life. He rested the package on his knees and tore the paper off slowly. He expected a painting of the garden, or maybe the dog. It wasn't. It was a painting of the city skyline, viewed from a high window, this window. The perspective was dizzying, looking down at the grid of streets. But in the reflection of the glass, ghosted over the city lights, was a man. He was standing tall, but his head was turned. He wasn't looking down at the ants below, counting his money. He was looking out toward the horizon, where a break in the storm clouds let a single beam of warm gold light spill through. The light hit his face, softening the hard angles. He looked peaceful. He looked free. At the bottom, she had signed it in charcoal, K. Frost. And on the back, stuck with a piece of blue painter's tape, was a note in her handwriting. "For the man who finally learned to look up. Thank you for the view." Beckett traced the signature with his thumb. He sat there for a long time as the sun went down over Manhattan, watching the light fade from the painting, finally understanding that he hadn't just lost a wife. He had found himself. 3 years later, Central Park was burning with color. The maples were crimson, the oaks a deep russet gold. The air was crisp, smelling of roasted nuts and decaying leaves. The smell of change. Beckett Hale sat on a weathered park bench near the Bethesda fountain. He held a paper coffee cup in his hands, warming his fingers. He was unrecognizable from the titan of industry who used to terrorize boardrooms. He wasn't wearing a three-piece suit. He wore a chunky, oatmeal-colored wool sweater, dark jeans, and a scarf. His hair was a little longer, touched with silver at the temples. The perpetual furrow between his brows had smoothed out. He watched a toddler waddle past him, chasing a pigeon with ruthless determination, followed closely by a harried mother. Beckett smiled. It was a genuine, reflexive reaction. "Excuse me," a voice said. Beckett looked up. A woman was standing a few feet away. She was holding a charcoal stick and a sketchbook. She was striking, not in the glossy, manufactured way Sierra had been, but in a messy, authentic way. She had wild curls escaping a bun, paint smudges on her army green jacket, and eyes that were intelligent and curious. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, pointing to the bench with her charcoal. "But the light hitting your profile right now, the shadows from the trees, it's perfect. Do you mind if I sketch you? I've been trying to get the angle of that jawline right for 10 minutes, but you kept moving to watch the pigeons." Beckett chuckled. The sound rumbled in his chest, easy and light. "My jawline usually costs a retainer fee, or at least it used to." The woman laughed. It was a warm, brassy sound that made a few people turn their heads. "Well, I'm fresh out of retainer fees, but I can offer you a warm croissant from the bakery on 72nd and some decent conversation about why the light in New York is better in October than any other month." Beckett looked at the empty space beside him on the bench. He thought of his life now. It was smaller. He lived in a brownstone in the West Village. He volunteered on the board of a literacy non-profit. He didn't have a private jet, but he slept 8 hours a night. He thought of Kennedy. Somewhere in the Bronx, she was probably knee-deep in soil, maybe holding a child of her own now, smiling at Travis over a bed of blooming marigolds. She was happy. She was whole. And for the first time, thinking of her didn't bring a sharp stab of regret. It brought a quiet warmth. She had been the catalyst. She had broken his heart so it could be reset properly. He looked back at the woman with the sketchbook. "A croissant sounds perfect," Beckett said, shifting over to make room. "I'm Beckett." "I'm Eleanor," she said, sitting down. She flipped to a fresh page, the paper crinkling invitingly. "Now, hold still, Beckett. Don't look down. Look up. The light is better that way." "I know," Beckett said softly, looking toward the tree line where the sun was breaking through. "I learned that the hard way." As Eleanor began to sketch, the sound of charcoal on paper scratching rhythmically, Beckett took a sip of his coffee. The wind blew a few golden leaves around their feet. If anyone had been watching from the bridge above, they would have seen a man who used to own the world, sitting on a bench with nothing but a coffee and a stranger. And they would have seen him smile. It wasn't a shark's smile. It wasn't a winner's smile. It was a smile he had never known he possessed. It was quiet. It was real. And it was just for him. Sometimes, the happy ending isn't getting back what you lost. It's learning who you are without it. Beckett lost his marriage, but he found his humanity. Kennedy found a love that let her grow, and Beckett found the courage to let her go. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us create more emotional stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to change. Thanks for watching.